Hi, today's video we are going to look at controlling the default options in the Starfront program. The defaults in Starfront can be set on three different levels. You can set default values for the entire program, you can set default values for a specific contract, and then you can change the default values for each specific design within a contract. Let's start off looking at where you set the program defaults. All of our defaults are controlled through the Configure menu on Starfront. These first 5 icons here are where you control your design defaults that apply to the entire program. Please remember that changing a default will not affect any design or any contract that you have done in the past. It merely defines the new default values that will be utilized by every new contract or every new design that you do on the system. So first of all, we have some system defaults. These are overall defaults related to an entire extrusion system. So if we take, for example, Swift 28, the default finish is DAP055P, which is white. The default glass is CF04. And that is why when we design a normal casement window using Swift 28, the program automatically starts with CF04. If you change that default, it will change what your default glass is for every new design that you do on the program. Then we can define whether we want the corners mitered or vertical or straight cut, depending on the system. We can specify whether or not to mill the ends. Remember, that is milling the ends of your mullion so that the end of the mullion fits into the glazing rebate, and I don't need to use a mullion end packer on that, and then what the amount of that adjustment is. So those are all the values that we can set related to the overall system. Then we have 2 settings for the frames and we have 2 settings for the inserts. The first setting for the frames is where you can control each individual aluminium profile that is used on that frame. So if I choose, for example, Swift 28, I then choose my standard Swift 28 frame. You can see my default bead is the 13mm angle bead. My corners by default are mitered. My frame profile is going to default to a standard equal leg profile. My mullion is going to start off with just a standard 28mm mullion, and my transom is going to start with a standard mullion or transom as well. Okay, so I could decide if every job that I do from now on, I want to use an unequal leg, then I can go and change the Swift 28 default frame profile to be an unequal leg. All right, what that will do is from now on, every single design will start off using an unequal leg. Let's just change it back to the standard before we go and corrupt our system. That's how we would normally make it with an equal leg standard. And same with my bead, my mullion, and my transom. Remember that your mullions and transoms are automated. You don't want to default, for example, to a 54mm mullion, because that means that the program would always start at that point. And because the program never puts in a smaller mullion, it would only work with a 54 or larger mullion, depending on the deflection due to the wind load. So you can change that, but you need to understand what you're doing by changing that. So I set that back to a standard mullion. So that first icon then are all of your profiles, and this is across the entire program. So from that point onwards, every new design I did on the Swift 28 system would use those options. I can do the same on my specific inserts. Now on a Swift 28 system, let's go and choose Swift 28 again. For example, I can say whenever I'm doing a top hung window in Swift 28, what is the default bead, the default mullion, the default sash profile, security bars, whether they must be there or not, that again will be covered in a future video, and your default transom. So you have control over every single profile that is utilized to make the inserts that go into the Swift 28 system. And of course I get a diagram of that as well there. Then I have my frame components. So this is now the components or the hardware items that are going to be used on that frame. If we once again look at Swift 28 and we just go and look at our standard 28mm frame, this is my default butterfly gasket, my default cross connector screw, my default corner cleat, what cross connector I want to use, that's when you've got a mullion and a transom intersecting, which fixing lug I want to use, what screws I want to use to put my frame together, my glass setting blocks, my mullion packers, my pop rivets, and my wedge gasket. So you have control over every single component or every single hardware item that is utilized on that system. So that is the components for the frame. Then we can do the same, is we can set the components for each insert. So once again, let's choose Swift 28. Let's choose the top hung sashes. I can see here exactly what item is going to be used, which hardware item is going to be used to make that entire sash. Please notice something. If we go to our control, your control is your mechanism that is controlling the movement of that insert. So on a sliding window, it would be the wheels. On a casement window, it would be the friction stay. On a hinge door, it would be the hinges. Whatever the mechanism is that is actually allowing that door to move. So by default, we default to the top hung 200mm stainless steel friction stay. Now, in a similar way to the way we have to default to the smallest mullion, you must always default to the smallest friction stay in that range. Because once again, the program will always increase the size of the friction stay if it needs to. It won't decrease the size of that friction stay. So if you never want to use the 200, you always want to start at the 300. You could double click on that. You could go and put in, I'm looking for the 304 stainless steel one, and I could choose the top hung 300. There's my standard 300 friction stay, and I could set that as my default. Now the program would always start with the 300 and it would automate it up from there if need be. So those are all of your items related to the components that make up that particular insert. So when I'm working through the configure menu and I'm working with these first 5 icons, just remember that I am talking about every new project or every new contract that I start on the program. Let's go and have a look at the defaults relative to a specific contract. So in that case, I need to open the contract. So I'm going to go to my contracts tab. I'm going to select open, and I'm going to open our contract sample 1 that we've been working on the whole time. And where I control my defaults for this specific contract are now here on this part of the program under my contract defaults. I have frame defaults, insert defaults, and then under components, I've got the frame components, the insert components, and then I can also adjust my clearances. So any changes that are made here will only affect this specific contract. But also keep in mind, if I've already done a handful of designs on this contract and I change a default, it will not affect the existing designs. Defaults only affect what you do from this point onwards. So if I go to frame defaults, okay, that will call up my frame defaults. Let it just initialize all of those values. If when it starts off it doesn't have any values in the screen, then you can just click on this button here which is Restore Program Defaults. And now it's created a set of defaults for my frame profiles which are specific to this particular project. So once again, if I looked at Swift 28, I looked at my standard Swift 28 frame, I will see coming from the program defaults, which are the ones we did under the configure menu, we default to an equal leg. But if I change this contract only to default to an unequal leg, that means every design I do from this point on this project or on this contract will start with an unequal leg. And a good application of that is, let's say this is a quote I'm doing and it's going to be on a face brick house and I want to use an unequal leg on that face brick house. Then what I can do is, before I do any of the designs on this contract, I go and set my frame to be an unequal leg, and from now on every design that I do will default to an unequal leg. Similarly, I can set my insert defaults just for this project. So if I had a look now again at SWF 28 and we looked at the top hand configurations, you will see here are all the options. Now on this project, if we decided we want all of our mullions and all of our transoms to be 54 mils, I could go in, sorry, click on the right option here. I could go in and I could automatically set all mullions and all transoms to 54 mil. Now within this project only, whatever I design will automatically start with a 54 mil mullion and 54 mil transom. So you need to distinguish between a program default and a contract default. Similarly, I have my frame components. These are now the components or the hardware items. Again, if it doesn't have any information, you just click that Restore Program Defaults button. That will load a set of defaults custom for this contract. The reason why it doesn't automatically load that for you is because sometimes you're not manipulating those defaults. So it's not necessary for you to store a full set of defaults against that contract. Now, once again, I could go SWF 28. I could choose my standard SWF 28 frame. This is the hardware. So on this particular contract, if we say this is going to be the job that we're doing in FaceBrick, maybe I can't use that fixing lug. Maybe I need to use a different fixing lug. In which case I could go in and I could filter out, let's say lug, and maybe the fixing lug that I want to use is that fixing lug, let's just say. And then I can specify that as my default. So you can control, once again, every hardware item or every component that is utilized on this specific project. Similarly with my insert components, and similarly with my clearances around my hinge doors. So this is a project I know that I'm going to go and fit before they tile, and I want to add an additional gap to the bottom of my doors. I can go into my clearances, and I can go and define then the clearances for the hinge doors, for example, on this particular product. Okay, so those are contract level defaults. So where do we then change a design specific default? Well, to do that, you need to actually go into that design. I'm going to go into my design screen. I'm going to choose our Clip 44 example. Remember, that was the example where we changed the glass to 4 mil at the top, and here I've got a hinge door. If I want to change, for example, the profiles that are used on this specific frame, let's say I want to put an R6 at the bottom of this frame, then what I do is here under either frame options is where I control the profiles, or frame components is where I change the actual hardware components. I can change those defaults. So I can go in and I go down to my sill and say I actually want to do a sill utilizing an R6 and change that now to an R6. Remember, it doesn't automatically update that drawing for you, but you can push this refresh button and then you will see, I've now got an R6 on my frame. Why has my insert not changed? Well, that's because my insert, if I go to panel number 5, that's where my insert, my door is. And I go to my insert options. When I designed this door, I designed it with an R4 sill. So if I would like the door to change to an R6, then I need to go in and I need to go and choose, let's say, an R6 with a box threshold. And once again, I can just push that refresh button just to update my drawing. And now you'll see I've got R6s right across on that design. So the changes that you make here are specific for this particular design. It does not affect anything else that I've done on the project, and it doesn't affect my defaults for the entire program. So hopefully from that, guys, you can see that your defaults is, first of all, it's a very powerful feature. It allows you to define every profile plus every hardware item used in every single design. Now, the defaults are preset for you to the most likely option that you're going to use. But if you find, gee, every time I design a hinge door, I must remember to change the door handle, then rather go into your program defaults, change the default handle, and from that point on, every new design you do will use the correct handle. I hope that's going to make sense to you and help you with your design work on Starfront. It's a very powerful feature, and if you use it and understand what you're doing, you can save yourself a lot of time in changing multiple designs. Once again, thank you very much for taking time to watch this video. I trust you are staying safe, staying healthy, and staying happy, and we'll see each other again soon for another video. Bye-bye.